Well, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will be heading to Washington this week to meet with Mr. Trump. And the meeting on February 15th, it won't be the first time that the two have met since Mr. Trump won the election, but it is their first sit down since he took office. President Trump has promised warmer relations with Israel. So what exactly would that mean moving forward? Ilan Goldenberg is the director of the Center for a New American Security Middle East Security Program. Thank you for joining us, Ilan. So the two leaders will have a lot to discuss, but what do you think is really number one on the table?
So I would probably say, and great to be with you, I should say, number one will be Iran, in my opinion, for both of them. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said he wants to talk to Trump about renegotiating the Iran deal. He wants to convince him that there are ways to do things differently. A lot of Netanyahu's security people are telling him, this is not a good idea, and have expressed some hesitance about it. They think that even if you didn't like the deal, at this point the agreement is solid and stuck, and you should look for other ways to try to push back against Iran. But thus far, it does not necessarily look like Netanyahu is going to listen, at least both based on what he said both privately and publicly. Trump, for his part, has also been very much against the agreement. But if you see some of the statements that have been made by his staff in the last week, some of the public statements from the administration, what they're basically saying is we don't like the deal, but we're going to respect the deal. And even as we continue to abide by it and keep America's word, we're going to look for other ways to push back on Iran in the region. We're going to push back in Yemen. We're going to push back against Hezbollah. We're going to push back against Iran's ballistic missile tests. So it's possible, I think, Netanyahu and Trump then come to some kind of an agreement on Iran where they agree, for the moment, the deal stays, but let's find other ways to counter Iran's behavior in the region.
Ilan, the president took a harder line on Israel's plan to build settlements, saying that it's not good for peace. Do you think this is going to complicate the relationship between the two leaders? What are you reading amongst the tea leaves here on Trump's stance on settlements?
Sure. So I think actually Netanyahu was probably pretty comfortable with Trump's stance on settlements, because what Trump did was he pulled back pretty dramatically from where Obama was, where Obama was saying no settlements anywhere, period, to essentially saying don't build any new settlements, but construction in areas that already have settlements is okay, which basically allows Netanyahu to say continue with doing what he's doing, but also turn to some of the more extreme right-wing elements in his coalition that would like to do even more aggressive things that would isolate Israel internationally and really cause a backlash, which Netanyahu doesn't want. And so he can say to them, look, Trump is against this, so come on, let's maintain good relationships with the United States. I think more broadly, there's going to be this question of where they move forward on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Trump seems to want to try to negotiate something and has argued for trying to bring in the Arab states into some kind of an arrangement with the Palestinians and the Israelis to try to move the process forward. That could make some sense. Israel and many of the Arab states have a lot in common, especially on Iran. But at the same time, the Arab states are going to want Israel to move forward in a substantive way in the Palestinian issue. And with the very far right-wing coalition that Netanyahu has right now, it's going to be hard to see any kind of real steps that can then lead to progress.
And it seems like the Trump administration is interested in moving the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Jerusalem, of course, is a city that Palestinians would like as a future capital, and the Israelis claim it as their capital. So where are we on that move?
So it seems that the Trump administration has started to backpedal from that. They've heard from a number of different Arab partners in the region, most importantly Jordan's King Abdullah, and the Jordanians play an important role in administering the holy sites of Jerusalem. Jordan is also a very close ally of the United States and a close partner of Israel, and the stability of the kingdom is a key interest of ours. And last week, Abdullah came to Washington. He met with Vice President Pence. He saw Trump at the prayer breakfast for a short while and really pushed very hard against this move. And I think the Trump team is reconsidering it. And frankly, I don't think the Israelis necessarily want it. They see the political benefit, but the potential security repercussions if you have protests in the Arab world, protests in the West Bank, potential threats against Israeli embassy diplomatic facilities around the globe. It's a big headache, and so I see them slowly starting to pull back from this one, maybe come to some kind of a middle ground where the new American ambassador to Israel lives in Jerusalem, but the embassy stays in Tel Aviv.
Okay, this one, I have to tell you, this next one just had me scratching my head. The U.S. blocked the appointment of a former Palestinian Prime Minister, Salam Fayyad, to lead the UN political mission. Ambassador Nikki Haley, she wrote this, that for too long, the UN has been unfairly biased in the favor of the Palestinian Authority to the detriment of our allies in Israel. That's really a different attitude from the last administration. What's your take on this, Ilan?
Well, Fayyad is absolutely the wrong person to try to punish for this. Fayyad is every Israeli and American leader's dream of what a Palestinian leader should look like. He was the former prime minister of the Palestinian Authority. In that role, he rooted out a lot of corruption. He did more than anybody to build up the state institutions of the Palestinians, which is something the Israelis want. He did a ton for Israel's security and is about as strong of an advocate of peace as you're going to find. So this, to me, is a complete, confusing, honestly outrageous move by the Trump administration that has a lot of people scratching their heads. And as far as I understand it from talking to some former colleagues at the State Department and at the UN, this was something that was a last-minute curveball. Everybody knew this was going to happen. Everybody was fine with it. And out of nowhere, in the 23rd hour, the Trump administration came in from the White House and said, no, we don't support this.
Do we know who threw the curveball, Ilan? Do we know who threw the curveball?
My understanding, I don't think we know exactly, but it sounds like the curveball came from the White House. Somebody at the White House who clearly was not familiar with Fayyad's background and track record and thought, well, we want to push back and seem strong and supportive of Israel, so let's go after a Palestinian, without actually looking into this man's background in any way whatsoever, because it just doesn't make sense. I hope that they find a way to artfully pull this back, because it really is. It's just a personal shot. It's a shot in the foot for U.S. diplomacy.
Lastly, I want to ask you, Trump has said that his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, will be instrumental to peace talks. What do you know about his views, and how do you think he'd be received amongst the Arab world?
Well, it's still not exactly clear what Kushner's views are on this issue. I mean, and it's also not 100% clear what Trump's views are on this issue. It seems that Kushner is relatively hardline to the right, supporter of the settlements, along with Trump's a nominee to be ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. That seems to be the case, but you haven't seen him speak publicly about this very much. And again, you know, some of Trump's statements are not consistent with where Kushner and Friedman have been. So, you know, I'm skeptical that in the long run, Kushner is going to be a key point man on this. He doesn't seem to be showing all that much interest in the Israel-Palestine issue. You know, if Elliott Abrams, who was long rumored to be the Deputy Secretary of State, but apparently did not make it through the process because of some criticism of Trump, if he had made it into the administration, he probably would have ended up being the point man. I still don't really believe that they have their absolute point man for this, or point woman for this issue, I should say. And we'll have to see who ends up running that process.
I like that mention of point woman, because there are a lot of women who would do well in that job. Ilan Goldenberg, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.